Okay, so I think we're good to go. Recording's on. Everyone's here. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I don't know what to call this really. Maybe it's like the second session we've done with Dennis. We did a session, I think, a month ago, 2 months ago. I don't remember exactly when, where Dennis really went into the specifics of how Microsoft measures call deflection. And what I really loved about this methodology, and we've had a small part in contributing to it, I think, is they really don't just go for the highest number they can possibly get, but they try and have the most legitimate number, which is always challenging their assumptions, always trying to figure out what the actual challenges are, and not just relying on the best number and the highest number that you can possibly find. And if you look back at that session, the popularity of that was great. The response was amazing. But this is very much a session for the data nerds amongst you. If you want to learn how to build a community, I'll be honest, this is not the session for you at all. But if you have a community, especially a community based around support, then this session might really help. Because I think what we're all seeing now is that a higher and higher percentage of deflection is taking place outside of the platform. And if you're just measuring the core deflection, which happens in the platform, then you're not properly representing the full value of your community. And Dennis is, I think, the only person I know at this point that's taken a real shot at trying to measure what is the impact of a community outside of the platform? What is the full footprint of that community? So I'll hand it over to Dennis Bob now. Maybe do a very quick introduction into who both of you are. And Dennis, I think for the people that didn't attend last time, maybe just spend like just 30 seconds giving people an understanding of the scale of the Microsoft community itself, just so people understand what it is. Because I think some people have a confusion about the tech community, Q&A, and so that might help as well.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you guys and I'll sit in the background. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bob, you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. I am new to the community space. Not new, but anyway, I've engaged with Dennis a lot in the last couple of years, and it's been fascinating to see the community space. I'll just be quick. I started working on Encarta Encyclopedia. If anybody remembers that, you can put it in the chat, a little hand up or whatever. And I've worked on discoverability features ever since. A bunch on the Windows team, from basically Windows XP to Windows 10. And then I moved over to an org adjacent to Dennis, I suppose, where I basically consult on anything consumer and commercial that has to do with discoverability. And that could be offline, what I think of as offline experiences. I train the model for the Get Help app in Windows 10 and 11, but it could be external, and largely is external in terms of SEO and what we're calling now GEO, generative engine optimization kind of thing. And I'll stop right there.
Thanks, Bob. So yeah, Dennis Paulette, I work at Microsoft. I've been here a long time, 37 to 38 or something like that. I'm old and ready to retire. And I've been in the community space for the last, at least 15 years. It was going to be my final gig, and I want to do something really fun that I really loved. And so I went to community, and then just haven't been able to leave because it's so great. So and I do a lot of work with BI and analytics now in that space. And that's where I ran across Bob, because Bob's an expert in search and understanding kind of what happens in that space, which is not my area. So the two of us really joined on this project to go ahead and measure rich snippet and search impact, which we'll get into in a second. Yeah, Rich, what did you tell me to talk? Make sure I do first.
I was going to say, maybe just very quickly, like in the last session, spend 30 seconds, just give an idea of the scale of the community, because I think there could be confusion about the different Microsoft entities that are out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, especially right now too, because we've just finished migration. So the site my team has worked on that for community-wise is called Microsoft Answers. It's a support community forum site, probably the largest in the world. If not, it's got to be close. Hard to say for sure. We get about, I think last year we had about 1.5 billion engaged customer sessions. So basically a visit to our site by a customer. So we get a lot of traffic. We had about somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 new questions every month. And it's really all about support. And mostly Answers has been on the consumer side. We do some commercial, what we think of as commercial, which is Windows Server and Windows Commercial, and then Office Commercial. We do a bit of that as well. We've recently migrated onto the Q&A or Learn platform, the Q&A community. So as part of this One Microsoft initiative to really kind of make ourselves less confusing as much as possible, we moved our site onto the Q&A forum site, which is run by an organization called Learn. So now there is close to one support site for community at Microsoft. We just finished that, and finished is a loose word. We just finished migrating all the content about 2 weeks ago. There are other communities and other forums like Tech Community at Microsoft, which is a bit more of an evangelist, enthusiast type of community. That typically, they get some support questions. Of course, there's some bleed over there, but that's the kind of thing they're focused on. So yeah, that's what we do. Okay, without further ado, what we're going to talk about today and kind of why it's a problem, what the issue is. So in situ search features, like things within search itself, rich snippets, it's becoming more and more of a solution for customers, which is great, using our content, but it's happening within search, not within the site like it historically always has. And so therefore we can't really measure it, or haven't been able to measure the impact of that. So a customer will come in, they'll go on, they'll see either a rich snippet or a rich answer or a featured snippet, and get their answer right there in search, and then they're done. And they use their content may or may not have been used, ours. And so we're trying to solve for that problem. Traditionally, organic search has been the primary driver for all what we call KB articles or knowledge-based articles, and community thread traffic. I think for answers, huge site, about 85 to 90% of all of our traffic came directly from search, whether it's Bing or Google or Yahoo or the other organic search. However, rich snippets, which is the term we use to kind of talk about these AI answers in search, has become now a significant portion of traffic. It's not the majority, but it's rapidly creeping up. And what's more interesting, not even more, it's as interesting, this same pattern is starting to happen layer up. I think about, kind of how the customer, so it's now happening in AI above search. So people will go to ChatGPT or Copilot or other things like that, and they're not even in search, and that same thing happens where our content's used and we can't see the impact. So there's really a couple layers of this, and that's when that one is getting bigger and bigger, as we all know. Okay, some terminology, since we tend to use a lot of terminology at Microsoft and a lot of acronyms. I tried to write down a couple of them. So rich snippet or RS is kind of the term we use to describe this combination of featured snippets, which are one source answers. So it'll be a quick little answer that relies on one authoritative piece of content that comes in. And that's a featured snippet. So there's a one-to-one correlation. So if we show up in a featured snippet, we're the only one who shows up. In a rich answer, it's an AI answer where they're grabbing the answer from multiple different sources, and they typically list out in the answer what the references are. And for those, we have varying levels of what we count for that. Like if we're the first reference listed in a rich answer, we give ourselves credit for 70%. If we're the fourth or fifth or sixth item listed, we don't take any credit for that in terms of counting for rich snippets, because the odds are we're not the primary resource that people are looking at there. Deflection, it's a term we use, and this is a loaded term sometimes. It's a term we use to describe where a customer has gotten the answer to their problem without having to create a case in assisted support. There are good ways to do deflection, customer-friendly ways to do deflection, and there's customer-not-friendly ways to do deflection. Like you can hide your phone number and hide your access, and you'll get increased deflection. It's not what we want to do. So we're really all about trying to provide the customer with the answer so they don't have to create a case. And in many cases, that's what they want as well. So, but that's when we think about deflection, that's what we mean. And I spent, as Rich mentioned, we did a webinar 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think, which I think is on YouTube, and Rich has it on his site, which we kind of dive into that whole deflection model and how we count it. So if this rich snippet thing was a recipe, that would typically be one of your requirements to have, one of your ingredients. You have to have a deflection model. Organic search, that's traditional search experience with the set of blue links you get and a little description. So that we think of organic search, it's traditional search. Deflection value and model, it's a set of logic and rules, calculations that you use to quantify the impact and the value to your business. We use deflection as our primary metric, but that's what we think about this deflection model and deflection logic. We use a lot of that for the rich snippet piece. And finally, KM, we use the term KM a lot. That refers to the group that Bob's in, which is knowledge management. So it's another team, another group at Microsoft that writes all the KB articles, the official Microsoft content knowledge base. And we reference those in the community a lot of times. But the same thing is happening to our content from a community perspective is happening with Bob's team's content as well. They're all being pulled into rich snippets and used there. Okay, self-help support models, impact and measurement. So this is a little bit more of a, we'll whip through these slides pretty quick. This is from Fever Briefings from Rich's site. As we think about the value of community and kind of how it's expressed, the place we're focused on is reducing cost. And for us, reducing costs, it's about reducing customer service costs and deflection of threats and cases. So that's kind of where our value in that. And that's what we're focused on. So that's what we're trying to measure is that. I shared this slide in the last presentation as well. So it's more of a refresher. If you weren't at the last one, this is kind of how we think about the customer journey, which isn't really a journey. It's not a repeatable journey like going from Seattle to Portland in my case. It's the same journey every time pretty much, and there'll be a few differences. The customers really can start at any one of these points. So they can start in search at the very far left, and they can just type in their problem in search, and they may end there. They may get their answer there. They may not get their answer and then decide they're not going to try anymore. They can also start those AI platforms like Copilot, ChatGPT, those kind of things, which is now different from search. It's still at the top of that funnel, and they may or may not get their answer and may quit, or they may continue kind of down the funnel. So if you go to the next section there, it's at Microsoft self-help site. So traditionally in Microsoft, this is Microsoft Answers, our community. It's docs or learn, some KB articles. It's a Q&A forum for commercial. Support.microsoft.com, which is we also call it SMC. So they could start there. They could just go right to those sites, look at content that could have come from those, search into those sites. And then you get into creating a support case in the support case creation portal. And then you actually get to assisted support. And then we try to harvest all that knowledge back into our self-help. So this is just kind of the model we think about. And a customer journey can start at any point along that path and also end at any point along that path. So when we say it's
yeah, I'm just going to say that I love this slide because you've really kind of encapsulated a lot of stuff here. And realize from my perspective, I end up sticking my nose into all of these areas because I want to optimize each portion where we could affect that ultimate deflection number. So yeah, this is a really great slide because it does show we have to pay attention to all of it. We can't just drop the ball at one point or another or say, that's not my job,
Yeah. And we care kind of whether they abandon or whether they continue or whether they got success at that point too. It matters because if they're abandoning, then maybe we're doing something not right to help them so they can find their answer. Okay. A build. Sorry, I need to hide our faces here. Okay. So this is another it's a little bit different view of this, but it's kind of this wheel of value and self-help impact. The first place I'm starting at is the upper right there. And this is the customer content site deflection. Historically, excuse me, this is what we've always talked about. And this is kind of always where we measure our impact. So for us, it's on the Answers community forums or it's on support.microsoft.com. We look at the traffic coming in, what they land on, whether they're successful, that kind of thing. Excuse me. Okay. In situ search, this is what we kind of talked about. This really began in the last couple of years. And it's the usage of this self-help content to solve the questions within search itself. And that's what we have not been able to measure. AI platform deflection, as I mentioned earlier, this is also up and coming now. It started a little bit later, not too much later, but this is really the usage of self-help in these AI platforms like ChatGPT and Copilot. Currently, we can't measure that. It's also probably really difficult, we think, to do compared to rich snippets, which was difficult enough. And then we have support agent deflection, this is the early days of this, which is where a customer can go to a support agent AI. So more specific than an AI platform like ChatGPT or Copilot, there could be a support agent within Microsoft support workflow that draws all this in. And that really is, we're not doing a lot of that at scale yet, a lot of small efforts on that, but that's also coming up that we have to figure out how to measure that. And that may actually be slightly easier because it is in-house. And then finally, non-deflective value. There's also some non-deflective impact value of the content we hope these teams make. One is just to lower the cost. It's a lower cost support model typically. So it's less expensive for us to handle a question in community than it is for us to handle that in forward chat typically. And it varies quite a bit by product, but it's a lower cost way for us to handle it, even if we have to handle it with agents in the community. And then also there's agent efficiency. The people who are answering the questions, that they can use this self-help to make them better answerers, and that's great as well. It's not deflection, but it's help. Okay. This was also in the last presentation. This is our deflection model at a high level. So first we think about self-help portfolio. So what is it that we're creating? So in the case of the KM, it's all their knowledge base articles. In the case of community, it's all of our threads. And then and which threads is important. So we count some threads, we don't count others. And there's a lot of detail on that. We then look at the customer usage. So we track how many, for all this content we have, how many customers are coming and using that content? Are they engaged with it? Things like that. And then are they successful with it? Because if we're going to measure deflection, we have to know what articles we're talking about. We have to know whether customers used it or not. And then we have to know whether they're successfully using it or not. And then we apply these deflection rates, which is a difficult but fascinating area, which is really, in a sense, how likely how likely would they have been to have created the case? Because a lot of times, self-help, we think about our own journeys. We'll go out and we'll look for a piece of content, maybe not find our answer, but I'm not going to call Comcast and ask why my cable's not up unless I really get desperate. So this deflection rate is really important because you have to account for that if you're going to measure how many cases you're avoiding. And that's where you get in the costs and the totals. So you have to have some kind of model like this if you're going to measure rich snippets as well. And in an ideal world, you use the same model, different data sources, similar calculations, because you want your model to really handle similarly the way you look at deflection. Okay, so now let's get into that. Okay, it's a little bit of data. And what I used the actual data for the month of June. Yes, for the month of June. Had to think about that one. We did a couple of versions. It's for answers consumer specifically, so not our commercial products. And this is the view of our model, of our regular self-help model with coming from Google search in terms of the number. So we start with about 1.16 billion impressions. And these are people that search and they see a Microsoft asset in the search results. So if we're listed number 25 and they only look at the first page in search, we don't show up as an impression there. But if we're number 10 and they show 10 lists in that first page, it's an impression they had a chance to see that content. Referral is when they actually click on that Microsoft asset link. So most people, I think, are fairly familiar with this terminology and logic. So in search, how many people see your link, then how many people click on it, which is a referral. And then they're coming, historically, that means they come to your site. And then we look at a thing called engagement rate, which is, did they engage with this content or did they just bounce back? So like if a customer clicked on a link, looked at this thread and said, oh, no, that's not it. And they hit the back button or left or close the browser, they didn't engage with that. And you can measure engagement a lot of different ways. It's not really as important what you measure as long as you measure it consistently. So for us, it's 15 seconds. Did they spend 15 seconds on this particular piece of content? Once they spent 15 seconds or more, we consider them engaged. Customer success rate is, did they tell you they were successful with that content? And so we measure that, and there's a couple of different ways. I'm not going to get into the details of how you measure that, but you really want to ask the customer. The question you ask matters. And this is our customer success rate around solving the problem, which is the measure they use in assisted support. So in assisted support, if they use solve, did it solve your problem? Then we want to make sure we use solve when we're measuring deflection of those assisted support cases. So we go from 1.16 billion to 65 million, down to 41 million, and then down to 13 million from a success. We have this notion called gating rate. Not going to go into that. It's in the previous topic, but it's really around, are all the customers who come to your community or your site able to create a case? If they're not, and in some cases they're not, like you may have to be an admin in Office 365 to create a case, then you want to not overstate your deflection by counting people that actually couldn't have created the case in the first place, even though you're helping them. Then we have our deflection rate. Again, this is a whole juicy topic. We talked a lot about this. We use numbers that we got from Feverbee, some of our own user journey mapping, and you'll see this number in one of two forms. It'll either be 2.6% for us, which is, that's the amount of engaged customers who were successful. So your denominator is successful customers who are engaged. Or you'll see it as about 0.5%, which is all of your referrals. So everybody came to your site. Just changing the denominator there. And then we look at how many cases we avoided. Okay, so now to the topic, rich snippets. So how do we measure then what's happening in search where we can't get some of this data. So what I've done below is kind of match our rich snippet logic that Bob and I spent a lot of time going over and gathering data for and figuring out how to gather data. And Bob's done all the work on the data side for working with a company called BrightEdge. They get to some of this critical stuff. And so, Bob, feel free to just chime in here at any point as we're talking through this and add pieces that I see.
Yeah, I mean, we basically just say we've got our Google Search Console data and we connect up with the API there. And then BrightEdge actually, they just tell us basically impressions, clicks, or referrals. So impressions on the search engine results page, referrals when they send a customer directly to our content. Those are good things. But what BrightEdge brings to the table is measuring whether for the remainder, the people who viewed it on the search engine results page but did not click through, was a rich snippet shown to them. And that way, then we can calculate out the model that Dr. Dennis has constructed here, which I think is amazing, actually.
So as Bob was talking about that, we know one thing we do know from Google Search Console, which everyone could know about their site, is how much traffic did you get? And so we get over a billion impressions a month. What the gap is we don't know how many of those impressions were rich snippets and where those showed up in the list. And so what BrightEdge gives us then is kind of the smaller universe. So BrightEdge will look at 17 million impressions. That's their sample size. And they can tell us, okay, for that sample size, the stuff in your portfolio, the threads from answers or the knowledge base articles you had, they have that list, or they have the domain name in case of answers. That showed up 5.8 million times this month. Sorry, they were clicked on 5.8 million. So we know how often they showed up. So we're getting the smaller side, the denominator from BrightEdge, like, okay, how many impressions did we look at? And then how often did the rich snippets of your content show up? And we know how big the overall world size is from the Google Search Console. So we can kind of then do the math and say, okay, as we apply this logic on the rich snippet stuff from BrightEdge, we just, what we call universe sizing it. So if BrightEdge, their sample size was 20% of the overall Google model, then we know whatever we come up, ratios we come up with, numbers we come up with from BrightEdge, we can multiply by 5 to get to the full impact, even though we're only measuring the 20%, that's our sample size.
Yep.
So within
realize this whole model, as Dennis has said, goes across support.microsoft.com and the troubleshooting content on learn.microsoft.com and all of answers.microsoft.com. So the total universe of impressions that we're dealing with on a monthly basis that we're trying to quantify is about 2.5 billion. I think it's a really kind of mind-boggling number when you think, like, I don't know, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people on the planet, if they were all individuals, might have been looking at our content over the course of a month. But anyways, yeah.
The search is still super powerful. So what we're kind of doing under the covers in those first two buckets is really getting that BrightEdge portion, looking at just the stuff that in this case that came to answers. And so answers threads only. We're separating out because BrightEdge can tell us this, whether it was a featured snippet or an AI overview. Because if it was that featured snippet, it's a one-to-one thing. So our thread was the basis for their answer in that case. For AI overviews, that's where we apply the 70% if we're the first reference, 20% for the second reference, or 10% of the credit if for the third reference. Yeah, and then we look at the number. Then also we can see how many times they actually click through on those rich snippets. So those are examples where in a rich snippet, they'll give you the answer, but you can also click on the links, the references on those links for more information. And that takes you back to the traditional organic search model, and we capture that. So even if they look at a rich snippet and say, oh yeah, no, I think that's my answer. I want to look a little farther into that. And they click on the reference, which happens to be our knowledge base article or our thread, then it'll take you out to your site. So we subtract those click-throughs out because we're already capturing that then the normal way. That's another thing we do in those first two boxes. And then we extrapolate it out to the 100% size of everything that really happened in Google.
We got a question in the chat, Dennis. Should
Yeah.
do you want to address these as they come up? I think that might be a good way to go.
Yeah, let me hold on it for 1 second, and
Sure.
I'll just finish this slide, I think, real quick. So we
Yep.
have our description up at the top there, and then we have our customer behavior, which kind of says what that thing is that the customer is doing at that point. And then down below, I kind of have that calculation in the rich snippet. So the first impressions, we calculate that from data we get from Google Search Console and BrightEdge. The second referral, same kind of thing. We know how many referrals we're getting from that rich snippet content. And then the crux of this, and why I talked about the deflection model up front, is we borrow the engagement rate, we borrow the success rate and the gating rate from our traditional experiences. So when somebody lands, we're using the same content on these rich snippets. We know what a customer's experience is, like how often they engage, how successful they are, whether it's gated, for that piece of content on our regular site. We can't get that from Google or from BrightEdge because it's all happening within search. They don't measure success. So we just take the success rate, the engagement rate, and the gating rate for that asset or that set of assets and apply it to the rich snippet value. So it's not a guess, but it's also we're not measuring success of the rich snippet per se either. We're just measuring the normal success of that article. So if it's not a very successful article, we're not going to get a lot of credit for that rich snippet either.
That's right. So I would just say there's a little extrapolation going on there,
Yeah.
right? Because we are
Right.
making some assumptions, but they're logical assumptions. They're not out of left field, So I think basing the engagement rates and the solve rates and stuff from our core content and applying that to these elements that appear in the rich snippet space is not bad if you're going to try and measure something like this. So I think it makes logical sense. I'm interested in the chat if other people think that makes sense too or not.
Yeah, this explanation tends to float well with folks who have questions about it. Like, so where are you getting this from? Well, we can actually, for this article, we know what the success rate is normally.
That's right.
Just applying that, no better, no worse. Yep. Okay. Yeah. What was the question in chat?
Can I jump in here first, if that's all right?
Oh, yeah.
I want to take the audience
Sure.
questions at the end, just so we make sure we get through all the presentation. But
Okay.
I feel this is like the critical slide, right? That explains
It is,
your
yeah.
model. And so there's so much going on here, like my head is spinning a little. So I want to just try and ask a few questions myself and make sure I understand this. So to begin with, you give a sample of content to BrightEdge, and then they tell you how often rich snippets appear in the Google search results. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think the way to think of it is that BrightEdge has their own database of analysis.
Yeah.
And I see there is mention in the chat of SEMrush, but this is basically what those kinds of companies do, is they have a big database of queries that they know are of interest, especially to our business as we're their partner on this, right? And they they start with the impressions of the queries, right? The queries are the important thing for each of our properties: answers, support.microsoft.com, learn.microsoft.com. There are queries that you can see in our Google Search Console instances that show up and match things that BrightEdge is actually measuring. So I think what Dennis is saying is that by combining those two things together, we get an overlap, and that represents a sample. And as Dennis said, it is often in the neighborhood of 20%. And you can imagine there's a hugely long tail, which, goes off into the distance. But we are making an assumption that that sample, that intersection between what our Google Search Console says and what BrightEdge says happened on the SERP, is a valid and statistically relevant intersection of data points. So does that answer your question, Richard?
Yeah, I've got like a few more for each stage
Sure,
here, just so I can understand it in the terminology I know. Okay, so based on that sample, you extrapolate and you estimate you have 17.3 million impressions, rich searches for the month of June. If someone gets the answer just in that snippet and doesn't click through, how does that show up in your stats? Because everything else feels like a funnel, right? And maybe I've missed it, but if they just get the answer in the snippet and don't click through, how does that show up in stats?
I think the click-throughs, that, as Dennis has pointed out, we don't want to double count. So the
Yeah.
click-throughs are referrals from the search engine to our sites. Those get subtracted out. The remainder, that's where BrightEdge comes in and says, you know what? When this query was entered and we have this number of impressions and we have this many clicks, this is the experience that the customer saw. And the reason why I feel fairly grounded in the math here is that we do see when a rich snippet is there that the click-through rates drop by I think, Dennis, it was in the neighborhood of 50%. So we know something different is happening there. They are engaging with something and not clicking through as often, even though we're in preeminent positions in the results. Does that make sense, Richard? So that's the
so.
space that we're operating in. They're only on the SERP. They are seeing our content there. It's just, is it the organic stack that Dennis alluded to, the traditional search, or is it this Gen AI experience that's coming up? And if it is Gen AI and they don't click through, we're trying to build that into the model and say, you know what? Our content is still adding value, even though they're not visiting our site. We're still solving customer problems and so forth. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Another way to just real quickly summarize it, when you look at that bottom rich snippet variable value, we're basically saying, even when a rich snippet shows up that has our content in it, only about a third of the time are they actually using that. And that's data we get from BrightEdge, and then we apply it to the remaining.
So that's the solve rate here that we're looking at?
No, it's not solve rate, it's the engagement rate. Sorry,
Okay.
not the engagement rate. It would have been a click through in the normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have an estimate of 17.3 million impressions, and then of them, you're estimating, or you know that 5.8 million clicked through to the site. Is that correct?
They would have clicked through. So this is the in the referral up above in organic search, when you look at the blue section up above, that we know because it's tracked. This is the number of people out of that 17 million that we're losing from a referral. Doesn't mean they've engaged with the content or they're successful yet. It's just the equivalent of how many would have clicked through.
It's the actual number, though.
Struggling on this one. Hold on. I'm getting there. Give me a second.
Yeah. I totally get it, because this has taken us months to kind of work through the logic and rethink about, what does this mean again? So yeah,
It's interesting for sure. Okay,
this is where the magic happens, is the background underneath these two. There's another spreadsheet, does all the math. But then from that point on, that's when you apply the model and the truths from your other part of your business, from the normal part of the business, to get down from 5.8 million to 30,000 cases.
Yeah, I'm looking at, okay, so snippets are the people that, if I understand that right, what you just said, they click through. But sorry, the referrals means that they click through, right?
Not exactly, because we're taking that portion. That portion is pretty small. I can't remember how many it is, but if they actually click through, we're subtracting that, because then we're tracking them anyway. This is the number that would have clicked through if they didn't find their answer insert.
You're essentially right, though, Richard. What we're saying, if there was 100 impressions and I don't know, 30% of them click through, then we're looking at the remaining 70.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the 70 who viewed it on the search engine results page, but did not click through. As Dennis says, we don't want to double count. Yeah.
So the total rich snippet referrals means the people that didn't click through.
Correct. Yeah. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I'm getting confused, because after customer behavior at the top, it says clicks on Microsoft asset linked. I thought that was the track. Okay.
Oh, it's a really good point. The naming convention's hard here because it's the equivalent of a referral.
It's right.
But it's not really a referral. You're right. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So it's a terminology. Okay.
Yeah.
So you remove the people that didn't click through, and then the engagement rate is how many people engaged. Well, obviously, I'm just putting a word, but just remind me again what engage means.
They spent at least 15 seconds on the content.
Yeah. And realize
Okay.
at this point, Richard, we are extrapolating, right? We're saying this is what would have happened had they visited our site. And we're just applying that same engagement rate to the impressions that remain after you take out the click-throughs. Yep.
Oh, so everything else is kind of the same model as above that. Okay, I
That's
get
right.
you. So just
Yeah.
apply the
Yes.
same models above.
Yes.
Okay,
This
I
is,
get it now. So the magic here is you figured out a way to understand how many impressions you're getting of the snippets, and then you're removing the click-throughs and applying the same model as above.
Pretty
yeah,
much.
there's
You
a
got
little
it.
subtle,
Okay.
but more in that second piece, but yes. And then, and then the other magic, and this is where people get stuck, is like, well, we don't know whether they engage with the content. We don't know whether they're successful or not. That's true. But we know with that piece of content that the person's looking at, we know what normally happens with that, and we can just use that number. Yeah.
Does that make
Does it
sense,
matter?
Richard?
Yeah, I think so. Does it matter though if it's like, because I feel if they go to an article, there's a lot more information, so the solve rate might be higher than compared with a snippet.
Yep.
But I feel like snippet is great if I have to turn it on and off again and it works, or whatever, like a simple solution like might be. But for a more complex one or an AI generator, I guess AI generator would give you the complexity.
So, as Dennis
Yeah.
mentioned, the featured snippet, where we're the only URL that produces the response, we consider that almost a one-to-one. But we do,
Credit-wise.
in the generative AI model, we get more credit in our model if you're the primary top URL that's used to produce the answer. We get 7/10 of a credit for that. If we're in second position, we only get 2/10. If we're in third, it's 1. And then beyond that, we don't give ourselves any credit. So I think
Got it.
that's our attempt to kind of tackle what you're bringing up, which is completely legit. But, I think our measurements are pretty conservative still. I believe that, the way we're approaching it is logical and is not, we're not trying to bump our numbers up really or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that wasn't what I was implying here.
No,
at
no,
all.
no. I didn't.
But definitely to understand it. I want to quickly put a question to chat as well. Just a quick yes or no, or partially. Like, how many of you feel you understand this model now? So maybe just take like 30 seconds in chat and just put yes, no, or partially, or maybe, whichever works for you. But and if it's partially, try and explain what part you don't. I think would be useful. A lot of partialies. Yeah, I feel that. Rebecca does. That's great news for you folks, I think. Chris, yes, partially.
And
Okay.
partially is fair because we haven't really gone into the actual spreadsheet from BrightEdge that we do the calculations for number 1 and number 2 on. I think
Yeah, and I think so much of it came from the model you shared last time around, So I
Sure.
think work with that helps. And also just the terminology is like hard to get your head around. And also if you haven't gone through the process of going to Search Console in the past, even understand what that looks like, how you get samples, all those things. There's so much that's going on. But what I'll try and do is try and diagram it from my side a little as well, so I can think about it in my terms, how that looks, and send that to you and check. Okay, so some people, yes. If it helps, nobody said no, which is fantastic.
Sales
I'll let
asking
you
a really
finish.
cool question too. But
yeah, let's come back to that. I'll let you guys like finish off the presentation, and then we'll come back to the question at the end. Just make sure we get through it.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good. There's not too much left. So in terms of the actual numbers, we thought it'd be helpful to share these out as well. So what's interesting is to have a slide for KM and a slide for community, and it's different. And I thought that was important to talk about. So this first one's around the KM level. We have a little blip there in May and June, but not sure what happened in May. We're not 100% sure either, because sometimes the data will be a little bit variable, and Bob will have to run it again and look at it. And so the point of the first chart really is the rich snippet volume and consumption isn't really tied to those blue bars in any meaningful, highly correlative way. So it's not because we're not getting more or less rich snippet consumption because our traffic is changing. Those lines are a little bit similar. You'll see it with it's different in answers. Rich snippet is going to change. That value is going to change over time, depending more on Google than anything else. Whether or not our content is in their AI and featured snippet volume, and whether they prioritize it more or less, because they do make changes on that, as we'll see in a second. The second chart, and I kind of went back and forth in this because there's two different scales. So the orange scale you'll see is from 0 to 140,000. The other one's from 0 to 2 million. So it talks about our total organic search deflection, total deflection. And the orange one is our rich snippet deflection. So these are the pieces we would be adding on. The piece we're adding on in some cases is as much as fills in the gap between the two, but in many cases it's not quite as big. What the scale, I'm wrestling with that because the scale shows that the orange is really big, but it's 120,000 compared to a month-over-month drop of in total. Sorry, struggle with this one. It doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't fill the whole gap. So there's some other things going on besides just rich snippet that's leading to some decline, which are the Google algorithms. So you can see, for example, on that blue line in the bottom, last August, 734,000 deflections. We're at 595 in June. And so we dropped about 130 there. We didn't go up 130. We only went up 50 in the orange line, if that makes sense.
There's some seasonality that comes into play
Sure.
here. Yep. We're big
But
around the holidays and then, yep.
Yeah. So the orange line doesn't account for 100% of the gap, but it accounts for a sizable, in this case, 30 to 40%. So this is a different story, and it's fascinating. I kind of want to share both of them with you. So when Google launched some of the rich snippet implementations on search, they immediately grabbed onto the Microsoft knowledge base content that was included in their algorithms. Answers, not so much. It was in there. You can see those numbers are really small though. And it wasn't until January that things started to change a little bit. And so this is when we're watching really close. So we were not part of their AI algorithms early on, but then they made a conscious change in January a little bit, and then they did another bump, and it's been rising really rapidly. And so this is not a change in our content, also not a change in our traffic. You can see the blue columns. It's pretty static. This is a change in Google's algorithm and prioritization of community content in their rich snippet data. So I'm really curious to see July, obviously, see what's happening there. Again, the same story, that consumption volume of rich snippets, then you look at the chart below, again, we have the orange versus the black. We're seeing 38,000 deflections caused by rich snippets in June. We're down farther than that. So again, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger piece of the gap. All right.
Okay, I got a quick question on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Going back. I want to try and understand what that bottom graph is saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be honest, my maths teacher would not like the way you labeled this graph.
Yeah, fair.
This is anyway.
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Is this showing, perhaps indirectly, that search traffic is going down? Is this?
Yes.
Interesting. So from January, search traffic has really dropped.
Search deflection. So to be fair, this is deflection. Now, similar things, we see similar trends when we look at traffic as well, because they're highly correlated.
Yeah, that's what I would thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, what's fascinating, Rich, real quickly on that one, the traffic itself, impressions, I have to be careful about the use of the word track. Impressions are not declining. What's declining are referrals and our click-through rate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's common on what I've heard as well.
Yeah.
So fewer people actually clicking on the answers that appear, but you're still showing up in the answers as often.
Yes.
Okay.
And so
but a lot of the gap, I was going to say a lot of the gap is now because people are getting the answer with rich snippets. It's still going down because rich snippets don't seem to account for everything.
That's right.
But it still means that your community is still having more or less the same impact as before. But for me, when I look at this, there seems to be a measurement challenge where there's other things that you probably can't measure with ChatGPT or something. That's, I'm guessing, is
Yeah, I think it's three things. So what we're seeing is a rich snippet, and what we're seeing right now, and it's different for answers than it is for KM. In our KM space, it's about 25% of the volume of the gap is rich snippet usage that we haven't been calculating up until now. For answers, it's lower, but it's rapidly getting there. Then there's your point about ChatGPT and AI. We don't know how big that is. I don't think it's as big as rich snippets, but it's going to be. And so we need to start measuring that. And then the third one is changes in Google's search algorithm, which are different than their algorithms that they run for AI.
Yeah, and it changes. There's a lot of volatility because boy, if they start testing community answers in there, that's the kind of spike we would see. And then once they see how it performs, then things might settle out. And so they're constantly testing these things. So there's a ton of volatility. So like Dennis says, we're looking at June like, holy smokes, but then we're anxious to see July because what happens now? It's going to be an interesting ride here.
And one more
Well,
comment, Rich. What we're seeing is that decline basically in the last 3 to 4 months. But prior to that, we saw an increase in, now answers is really big, remember, we're talking, $1.5 billion. We saw an increase of about, just ballpark, 75% in our traffic over the last 18 months before that. So while we're looking at this piece here where it looks like, oh God, it's really cratering, we're still above where we were, 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah, hugely.
But there was a change in March, it looks like.
Yep. And I think that just my little discoverability nerd hat on for 1 second, just to say that I think that Google, what we've seen in the results, if I look at the query that's being asked and the content that's being included, both in organic and in these Gen AI results, the syntax of the way the customer asks the question is very closely correlated with the content that's being provided, which is to say that forum serves a very important function in AI and in organic search in the sense that they are referencing content in forums that is representative of the way people ask for things. And so there's a big chunk of the search volume that Google's finding value in that comes from community. And so they've really bumped up. And when you have an authoritative site like Dennis and his team have built, right, then they trust it. They trust it more and they get included in more results and in more testing and stuff like that. It's been amazing to see.
I'll let you, I'll let you wrap up the presentation so I can get some to questions.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much done. So yeah, rich snippets use is growing. So we kind of talked about at the end, there's really it's not filling the gap we're seeing, which is relatively recent, but it's in that 20 to 30% range right now. And like for answers, it's rapidly growing. This trend's going to be exacerbated as over time as it keeps going. And then AI usage, which is going to happen outside. So we need to go solve for AI as well. And for Bing, which we haven't done yet either. And again, ideally you want to use the same model and same logic flow for how you're measuring rich snippets in AI as you do for your organic, your normal stuff. And then also it's the current, as you can tell, some of those charts were made yesterday. So our current model, it's not perfect or precise for rich snippet, but it's profoundly better than not being able to address the question of what's happening. So we feel like we can address the question of what's happening. Oh, okay, yeah, rich snippets. Is it 10%? Is it 90%? Turns out it's about 20 or 30. And we can see whether it's growing or shrinking. So
and ultimately that's the important thing that we're trying to tell management, right? You're not seeing the whole picture if you're just looking at visits and stuff, and that the value that this content community is adding has to be calculated with the whole impact to the extent we can get it, right? We still have to ground it in real data, but that's an important message for sure.
Yep. And that's it. So what other questions do people have? Thoughts, comments?
Okay. So let me take some questions. I think we've got 5 minutes and around 5 questions. So maybe a minute per question if you can. First question was from Chris. Doesn't have access to BrightEdge, but does have access to SEMrush, which comes up a couple of times as well, which can show us topics that appear in AI summaries, but still trying to figure out how to turn that into actionable data and operationalize. Any tips or familiarity with SEMrush for this? It's probably a question for Bob, I guess.
I've worked with SEMrush on a different project in in another organization that I partner with, and they would essentially play the same role as BrightEdge. So if you think of the model, BrightEdge, we get them connected up to our Google Search Console, and then BrightEdge uses their own data to say whether a rich snippet showed up or not. That's a lot of hand waving, very high level. There's a ton of detail that is mentioned there, but that is basically what SEMrush would bring to the table, and you could apply the same model using them. Yep, that would be.
And one of the big changes we made was instead of having BrightEdge just look at a lot of sample queries, we said, look at the queries where these results from our portfolio show up. So look
That's
at,
right.
and that changes everything, because then you're just looking at just your content. So how many times was the reference article coming from SMC or answers.com?
We do collect it all, and we're trying to figure out if we didn't provide the answer and someone else did, why are they in there and we're not? And that goes to looking at content structure,
Yep.
how we can optimize for AI, and that kind of thing. Sorry, we went
No,
10
good.
seconds over on the 1 minute rule.
I'm sure we'll survive. Question from Jesse in Q&A. Probably one for Dennis. In addition to search deflection dropping, are you also seeing a drop in new members joining the Microsoft community?
If it's a fair question, we don't have that measured because they're not required to log in. They're only required to log in when they create a question or do a reply. And the bulk of our users don't. They're just there to find, because most of the time their question's already been asked. Some, 40 to 70,000 times a month that they'll create their own. But so we don't really have a membership metric. We look at customer sessions, and the customer sessions up until the last 3 months have been growing.
Okay, question from Caroline here. Does this model cover AI summaries as well, or just rich snippets? Any suggestions for how to count AI's summaries?
It depends on terminology here. If we're talking about, Bob, what's the word? It's rich answers and featured
snippets. Yeah. AI overviews. We're only
Yeah.
talking about AI overviews. And so if you're talking about AI mode, maybe that's where you're coming from. We have not measured that yet. Yeah. So it's just AI overviews. If you see that on a results page, that's what we're measuring. And then featured snippets is the other one. And anything beyond that, well, there's two other types that we do. I won't go into what
super
they are.
small. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're talking about AI platforms like ChatGPT, Copilot, no, we haven't gone there yet. That's next. It's going to be different and hard, but we're not doing that.
Just to close on that, Caroline asks, rich snippet equals AI overviews. It's AI overviews plus rich snippet, plus featured snippets, plus quick answers, plus one more that I can't remember the name of right now, but it's essentially those rich experiences that appear right on the SERP. And
yeah, rich snippets are umbrella term for all those.
Yeah. Sorry, used up some time there.
No, it's fine. I think actually in presentations, it might help, like if we do this again, to have like the visualized example of what each of these are. Question from Jennifer, maybe the last one, but I'm trying to get to Lauren as well. Is there a way to measure if someone opens a tab, types in ChatGPT, etc., after the search results / rich snippets come up? I think there's a group of people that switch over to find their answers.
No, I mean, the problem we have with ChatGPT and some of the other ones is they don't have like webmaster tools that allow us to understand what the query was that was typed and how they engaged with that content. So it's really hard to ground our data that way.
Hey, Bob, could we get from BrightEdge or Google Search Console a way to know that every time that where the query was ChatGPT, if it was the first query or the second query?
Yeah, I mean, we can get that. We can log that stuff. I'm just saying that in terms of grounding it in reality and saying to our management that, and we do, I've actually started a project to compare Perplexity and ChatGPT and Google AI overviews and where are we in and where are we out. But if you don't have a grounding in how many times people ask that question in ChatGPT or Perplexity, it's really hard to, we could do some universe sizing there saying ChatGPT is 1/6 of Google or something traffic wise. You can imagine.
Question. We don't measure today if you got moving from search to AI platform.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you have time for one more?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, question from Lauren from Square. Oh no, she's moved to Adobe now, I think. Are you thinking about community content syndication or building a presence on non-owned channels like Reddit in order to increase authority, in order to fuel these models in a variety of ways? Or is it a more important priority to optimize and measure / track your own community to respond to increased AI usage? It's a big
That is
question.
a wonderful question.
Great one.
It is a good question.
Yeah, I would say it's neat. It's what we have done, resourcing all kinds of reasons, focus of getting to one Microsoft approach, is focus on first party on Microsoft.com. We've dabbled outside of Microsoft.com in actually in having presence there. Syndicating your content, there's some problems with that. If you syndicate your reach and your presence by having people answering questions, that's fine. If you syndicate your content, you're starting to also then bifurcate your search impact of that. Now that lives in 2 or 3 or 4 different places. And that's a little, I think we'd be less likely to do that because people can get to it now. It doesn't have to be in Reddit.
I think what Lauren might be getting at a little bit is an SEO type thing where if you do get credit on Reddit, you can increase your SEO authority in ways that can provide benefits that are kind of orthogonal to just what you're doing on your site. It'd be akin to link building or something. So if you are engaged in Reddit, you may show up in more, if you're more active in those spaces, then you can get credit and they'll show you more on the SERP. So what I'll say really succinctly, because Richard's looking at his watch, is just this fiscal was about drinking from the fire hose to measure things. And now FY26, we really need to start to get into a mindset that Lauren is kind of alluding to here, which is how do we optimize our experience so that it does show up more in ways that we can influence? And that might mean in the community space, that might mean, should we have tighter guidelines around what titles should be in forum posts or ways to guide customers to write better titles? Or I don't know what that looks like yet, but those would be the kinds of things. I don't think we're probably going to go into the syndication space though. If I was going to put a stake in the ground right now, I think we would probably take a step back from that.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay, let me wrap things up here. I just want to say thank you so much, Dennis and Bob. It's been really, it's been a challenge because I feel like the model you have is so complex, but that's what gives a greater degree of confidence and precision. And it'd be very easy to have simple rules of thumb instead. And what I really admire about both of you and what Microsoft does, that you share the data more openly than any other organization I know. And I'm so impressed with that. And I think it really helps everyone in this space because we need the data. We need to know how you're measuring it, the challenge you have. And I think what I also really admire about you both is you share what you don't know. Like, I never feel that you're here to brag, like how amazing you are. I always feel like this is where we're at today. And I really like that because I think that moves us forward and it gives us so much more information and insight than we've had before. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate your time and your effort a lot.
One quick comment on that. Just I'll credit back at you. You're the one who made us put the bug in our ear to do the sharing about 5 years ago. Because we didn't, like everyone else, we didn't. And you said you should share this. And we talked about it and we're not saving babies here, and we're not really competing either. These aren't the same customer groups and it's about support. We should help each other out.
And we could do a 4-hour session about all the things we don't know, because that there's plenty of that. So
anyway, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you so much for that. And thank you everyone else for attending. I know it's being a more data heavy session, but I really hope it's helped and given you some insights. We will share the recording. I don't think we need many edits in the recording, so probably in a couple of days. And again, thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see you all in hopefully a future session that we do with both of you in the future. Thanks again, everyone.
Awesome.
And goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.